I'm conducting an experiment here. So you tell me, which one of these glasses has the most wine in it? You give up? Sorry, it's a trick question. All of these glasses have exactly the same amount of wine in them. It's an optical illusion. Now, according to the U.S. Government Department of Health and Human Services, moderate consumption of alcohol is 1 drink per day for women and no more than 2 drinks per day for men. Sounds kind of unfair to us women, right? But women process alcohol differently, and they generally have less muscle mass than men. So alcohol becomes more concentrated in their body tissues. However, it's generally true that women have a more developed sense of smell, and the percentage of women who are super tasters is much higher than the percentage of men. So we women can enjoy less quantity, but we perceive more in what we do get. Now back to the experiment. You've probably seen glasses in all of these sizes in restaurants. Now here I've filled a glass to capacity like you would see in perhaps like a steakhouse. So which one is considered 1 drink? Now the Department of Health definition of 1 standard drink in the United States means 5 ounces of wine. So all of these glasses right here have 5 ounces of wine in them. But notice how little 5 ounces looks in the Bordeaux or the Burgundy glass, and how much more it looks in this wine glass. I mean, it's surprising how the same amount of wine can look so vastly different depending on the glass. Now, restaurants sometimes buy bigger glasses because they look more impressive, and they do. But how much are we getting in this glass? So let's find out. That's approximately 8 ounces. So if I'm supposed to have 1 drink a day, which one is it? I'd like this one, but that's over 1.5 drinks. Now 1 bottle has approximately 5 standard drinks in it. So do the math. This may explain why when you go to a restaurant and order only 1 glass of wine or finish an entire bottle with your sweetie, we feel tipsy. So does this mean that 5 ounces is the right serving size for all wines? Not really. So let me show you something else. In our last lecture, we spoke of California, where the sun is shining, the climate can be really hot, and sometimes the grapes can get super ripe. After fermentation, all that sugar turns into alcohol. So here we have a German Riesling, and we have a California Zinfandel. The German Riesling has about 8% alcohol, and the California Zinfandel has 15.5% alcohol. Zinfandel as a grape loves the sun, and I've seen bottles at 17% alcohol by volume. If we do the calculation in alcohol units, 1 glass of this California Zinfandel would equal almost twice the number of drinks of this German Riesling at 8% alcohol. So in addition to understanding what 5 ounces looks like, keep in mind the alcohol level in the bottle as well. All of this was a bit of a detour, but an important one. Let's move to the coast now, from California to Washington and Oregon, which have cooler climates than California. You'll need the following wines: an Oregon Pinot Gris, an Italian Pinot Grigio, an Oregon Pinot Noir, preferably from the Willamette, a Washington Merlot, a California Merlot, and a Washington Syrah. Look at a map of Washington and Oregon, and you'll notice a geological structure that runs through both, the Cascade Mountains. This is significant in terms of their respective climates. Most of the vineyards in Oregon are on the west side of the Cascades, and most of the vineyards in Washington are on the east side of the mountains. Now remember in Lecture 8, when we spoke of the wet climate of Oporto and the dry, warm climate of the Douro Valley? The same concept applies here in Oregon and Washington, and explains the differences in grape varieties and the specialties within each state. Now, as I said, most of the wine regions in Oregon are on the west side of the Cascades. This gives their wine regions more of a maritime influence from the Pacific Ocean. This means it's cool, more humid, and has a longer growing season, which makes it perfect for cool climate varieties. Now, why do we care about the temperature and length of the growing season? Think of it as you would of cooking. When I was first learning how to cook, I could never cook chicken properly. I'd put it in a really hot oven, and while on the outside it looked really golden brown and yummy, on the inside it was totally raw. And this is the same with grapes, sort of. If a climate is too hot, the grapes will get enough sugar, but the tannins and the flavor won't develop as much. If the climate is too cool and the growing season is too short, meaning it's cut off by early rains, for example, meaning you have to pick, there won't be enough sugar, tannins, or flavor in the grapes. You may get some green, underripe flavors as a result of this. However, when the temperature is just right and the growing season is long enough, everything comes into balance. Yield and style have an impact as well. In Oregon, Pinot Gris does very well, but let's taste it versus an Italian Pinot Grigio. Same grape, two different countries. Now again, make sure that the wines you compare match each other in vintage and price point as much as possible, because this gives you a more apples to apples comparison. So let's take a look at our Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio. Let's smell them. You're probably going to find the color is going to be very similar between these two, but let's smell them. Now you're going to notice that the Oregon Pinot Gris is much more upfront in its fruit. It's a bit more obvious. And the Italian Pinot Grigio is much more reserved in its fruit, and you have more mineral tones. Again, this tells us that it's from the Old World. And the aromas that you get with Pinot Gris is you've got the stone fruit, and it's got this floral component to it, a very light honeysuckle kind of scent to it. So let's taste them. The Oregon Pinot Gris is a bit more fuller-bodied than the Italian Pinot Grigio. That's not to say it's a full-bodied wine, but it's fuller in body than the Italian Pinot Grigio. However, if we compared this to an Alsatian Pinot Gris, you're going to find that the Oregon Pinot Gris is somewhere in between the Italian Pinot Grigio and the Alsatian Pinot Gris. But it's medium-bodied. It's got a nice level of acidity as well, so it's somewhere in between those two. So the Oregon Pinot Gris, in terms of style, is kind of a cross between the unctuous flavor style of Alsace and the very medium everything ever popular of Pinot Grigio. Actually, you see a few other Alsatian varieties here in Oregon too, such as Gewürztraminer and Riesling. Chardonnay is planted here as well, but generally shows higher acidity than in California given the cooler climate. Now let's look at Oregon's premier focus, Pinot Noir. The best known AVA for Pinot Noir in Oregon is the Willamette Valley, just south of Portland. This is the coolest region in Oregon versus the regions closer to California, the Umpqua Valley and the Rogue Valley, and it's Pinot Noir territory. In 1980, there was a French-sponsored blind tasting comparison similar to the Judgment of Paris, but it's much less well known. Although Oregon placed second, the results caught the eye of the Drouhin family, the famous Burgundian producers. Robert Drouhin established his own vineyard in Oregon in the 1980s, calling it Domaine Drouhin. He was the first Burgundy producer to invest in a wine region outside of France. One thing I didn't mention about Pinot Noir earlier is that it mutates very easily. I don't mean it spontaneously sprouts ears or anything like that, but there are many clones or individual propagations of Pinot Noir, each with its own set of characteristics. Some clones provide delicate structures, while others are darker and more robust. And others have more focused aromatics. Dijon clones and clones from Burgundy are quite popular in Oregon. These clones are lower yielding and generate a more complex aroma and Burgundy-like structure than other Pinot Noir clones. In California, you may also hear about Pinot Noir producers talking about mass selection of grapes. Mass selection is the propagation of vines from a specific field because a producer wants to replicate the characteristics of the mother vines in that field. However, the identity of the specific mother vine in the mass selection is unknown. This is different from clonal selection, in which you do know the name of the mother vine. For example, 777 is a Dijon clone of Pinot Noir from Burgundy. Compare this to the term heirloom clones, which is a description you hear in California of a mass selection for Pinot Noir. If you want to get a really good conversation with a real Pinot Noir connoisseur or Pinot geek, ask them about the types of clones that were used to make the wine. This is a Pinot Noir from Willamette. For fun, you may just want to grab a California Pinot Noir or a Burgundy Pinot Noir to compare and contrast, but let's take a look at this. Well, it's very pale in color. It would be because it's Pinot Noir. We already talked about Pinot Noir. But in comparison to, let's say, a Carneros in California or a Bourgogne Rouge from Burgundy, this is going to be a little bit deeper in color. Now let's smell it. It's very aromatic, but again, it's very aromatic because it's Pinot Noir, so it's showing its typical characteristics. And you get the strawberry notes, the cherry notes, but Oregon is known for having a little bit darker cherry, so more black cherry. And I also, just like I get in Russian River, every once in a while I get this kind of cherry cola kind of aroma to it. Now, in the Red Hills of Dundee in Willamette, they have a soil there called Jory. It's a type of clay loam, and the Pinot Noir that's grown in this type of soil has a higher level of acidity and generally is brighter in its character. Now, this is opposed to the Willackenzie soil that you get in the Yamhill foothills. And the Pinot Noir that's grown there has a darker, bigger structure. So let's taste this. For Pinot Noir, it's medium-bodied. And I do get some more dense tannin in there, but it's not gripping, nowhere near like Cabernet Sauvignon. But it's a little bit more dense for Pinot Noir. It's got some very well-balanced acidity. This also tells us that it comes from a cool climate. Now, when you take a look at the prices of Oregon wines, like take Pinot Noir, for example, you'll notice that they can be higher than California. The quality of the wines here are high, and they have a great clonal selection here. However, it's also a function of supply. Oregon is a much smaller wine-producing state, and they don't have some of the economies of scale afforded by some of the larger brands in California. And that's okay. That's totally fine by them. Many Oregon producers actually pride themselves on being quite different than California in many ways. The culture in Oregon wine country has a different feel than some of the areas in California that has a much more developed sense of tourism. But Oregon feels much smaller, more boutique-like. Normally, when visiting a wine region, you would expect that the people to be really focused on their own wines. But I have to tell you, the people in Oregon are very wine savvy. I was quite surprised by their level of wine knowledge, not just about their own region's wines, but about wines all over the world. They are passionate about wine, period. Okay, so have you memorized the 32 Grand Crus of the Côte d'Or? The 57 appellations of Bordeaux, the 4,000 villages and vineyards in Germany? Well, good. Now you can start memorizing the more than 650 wineries in Washington. Surprised there are that many? Though a distant second to California, Washington is the second largest wine grape growing state in the United States. In Washington, close to Seattle, is the AVA of Puget Sound. This region is on the same side of the Cascades as the Willamette Valley, and has the same maritime influence. Seattle is known as one of the world's wettest cities, but on average it's drier than Burgundy, sunnier than Bordeaux, and is cool as the Loire Valley. Here you also see Pinot Noir. And if you're in the Seattle area, you should probably take advantage of their wine tasting opportunities. Now, about a 2-hour drive east of Seattle and the Cascade Mountains is Washington's largest AVA, Columbia Valley. It's quite large, and to give you an idea, it's about 1.5 times the size of Belgium. Now, some producers in Washington will tell you that they're on the same latitude as Bordeaux, which is true. But don't expect the same terroir, as latitude is only one factor in terroir and shaping the character of the wine. These regions on the east side of the mountains are shielded from the Pacific's humidity and storms, so they're quite warm, quite dry, and very sunny. However, the climate here is continental, So while it can get hot in the summer, the winters are fairly Arctic and cold. Remember in Lecture 3 when we spoke about conditions where the cold can kill vines? This happened in the big winter freeze in Washington in 1996 and again in 2004. But despite the northern latitude, they get more than 300 cloud-free skies per year. Because of this, they get more hours of sunshine than even the Napa Valley in California. And it's so dry, it's like a semi-desert. So irrigation is absolutely necessary. However, this dry, sunny, and very warm weather with cool nights makes it an ideal place to grow varieties such as Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Syrah that have thicker skins and love the sunshine. Now let's go back in time for a second to the late 1800s. In the United States, the Civil War was still raging, but European wineries were curious about American grapevine species. As we mentioned in Lecture 3, there are different species of grapevines, and America has indigenous grapevines such as Concord, among others. They didn't have strict quarantine laws back then, and a little stowaway found its way over to Europe. It was a root louse that the American grapevines were resistant to, but the European Vitis vinifera grapevines were not. By 1863, the root louse infestation had led to the devastation of many vineyards in France. From 1875 to 1889, France, its wine production fell by over 72%. There was widespread panic at this time, and it looked like the end of the wine industry as this root louse was quickly spreading throughout Europe. This root louse is called phylloxera, and it feeds on the roots of the vines, creating these little galls that prevent the vine from taking up water and nutrients. Eventually, vineyard owners turned to crazier and crazier attempts to stop this plague. They tried everything from flooding the vineyards with white wine and urine, and they even planted frogs. But there was no known cure. To save the industry, there was only one course of action: grafting European Vitis vinifera scions to American species rootstock. When I was studying this at first, I felt American pride and thought, the Americans saved the wine industry. Well, that's only half true, as our pest actually loused things up, quite literally. Grafting to American rootstock caused quite a stir, and some believed that grafting would change or dilute the purity of the Vitis vinifera essence. So why do I mention this now? Because there's something unique about Washington's grapevines, because many of these are ungrafted and are still on their own Vitis vinifera rootstocks. You see, there is one type of soil that phylloxera hate, and that's sand. It's inhospitable to them. Luckily, the Columbia Valley has sandy soil. Phylloxera also hate icy winters, and as we just discussed, this region has plenty of those. They also hate high altitudes, which we're going to talk about when we get to Argentina. Now, how important is it that many vines here are ungrafted on their own original rootstocks? Does it really make a difference? Well, it's debatable. You'll find impassioned arguments on both sides. If nothing else, the rootstock is unique, and you can taste for yourself whether you think it makes a difference. Merlot is the most widely planted grape variety in Washington. So let's taste the Washington Merlot against the California Merlot. Now, the color is not going to make too much of a difference. It's a same grape variety. You may notice a difference if there's a different oak regiment to it. But let's smell them. Definitely get the Merlot kind of character. So the plum, the blackberry notes, dark fruit. Let me smell the California. The fruit here smells different. So even though I'm getting dark fruit and blackberry, those Merlot notes, it smells riper, almost like jam, like blackberry jam. Whereas the Washington Merlot, it's ripe, but it's not as ripe. So let's taste it. You'll notice that the Washington Merlot is a bit higher in its acidity, and feel free to go back and back and forth between these two in order to really get the differences. The body and weight of the California Merlot is a bit bigger. And you'll also notice the warmth on your back palate because the California Merlot is a bit higher in alcohol. These are two very different expressions of Merlot. One is of the California expression, and the other is Washington. The Washington Merlot comes from Columbia Valley, but there are two sub-appellations within Columbia Valley, the Yakima Valley and Walla Walla Valley. Yakima is the historical center of Washington's wine industry, and most of the vineyards are on the southeast-facing slopes of Rattlesnake Hills and Red Mountain near Benton City. It's reminiscent of the Australian outback, if you need a reference. Walla Walla is the more famous of the two areas, and I always remember Walla Walla from Bugs Bunny cartoons where he joked about Walla Walla, Washington. Walla Walla has its own AVA, as it has a distinctive set of climatic features. It receives twice the amount of rainfall as the rest of Columbia Valley, which makes it unique in Washington. Winemakers there don't have to irrigate as much, and some don't irrigate at all. Cabernet Sauvignon is found here, and in fact, Walla Walla is well known for it, as well as for Cabernet Franc, which is the state's fourth most planted grape variety. Betts Family Vineyards is one of my favorite producers, as they were the first luxury Washington wines that I tasted. And besides, their winemaker is a brilliant master of wine. Their Père de la Famille is 85% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 74% of the grapes come from Red Mountain. I've done blind tastings comparing their Bordeaux blend to that of California, and I've mistaken the Washington ones for Bordeaux. There is a richness and a concentration that these wines have that I love. Even the esteemed wine critic Robert Parker gave the 2007 95 points. If you know anything about ratings, that's ridiculously high. But the variety I'm most excited about here in Washington is the Betts Syrah. Here is their Syrah. It's called La Sirène, but any Washington Syrah will do. Now notice the color. This color, this is limited quantities and very high quality. It's very deep in color. It's deep ruby purple, and it's quite opaque, actually. Let's smell it. It's moderately aromatic. I wouldn't say jumping out of the glass, but you get those aromas of rich red raspberry and also some blackberry. It's a bit darker, but you also get those black pepper notes, and there's some sweet vanilla and some toasty notes and some spice, but a hint of olive and some smoke. And this tells me that this is more along the lines of the Rhone style versus the Shiraz style. Let's taste it. Now for a Syrah, this is quite full-bodied. The acidity is very well balanced, but it's very rich, concentrated and dense. It's got some gripping tannins, but it's very well balanced. It's just balanced up here. But if you notice, even as I'm talking, the more I talk, the flavors just keep jumping out. It has a long, long finish and many complexities and layers of flavors. However, you do see both styles of Syrah and Shiraz in Washington. So if you're in a restaurant or a store and you're looking at a Washington Syrah, you may want to ask the sommelier who has tasted it recently or the retail staff if it's a Syrah style or a Shiraz style. Tasting Syrah here reminds me of how noble Syrah Shiraz is, that it can grow in such a variety of climates and give unique expressions of terroir, yet keep its integral characteristics. Now it's time for another challenge. We're 75% of the way through this course, and I think you'll be surprised by your knowledge at this point. Here I have two wine reviews. Wine review number 1. Deep ruby color and concentrated fruit with tons of ripe blackcurrant fruit and cassis, vanilla, a hint of coconut, cigar box, and mineral notes. On the palate, it is dense and full-bodied with very chewy tannins and warmth towards the back palate. It has a long finish with a high level of complexity and is very well balanced. So what do we think about this? Is it a thin-skinned grape or is it a thick-skinned grape? Well, the review says deep ruby color. Well, chances are it's a thick-skinned grape. So from the varieties that we've discussed so far, what could it be? Could it be Cab? Could it be Merlot? Could it be Syrah? Could be any one of those if it's a thick-skinned grape variety. So is this from a cool climate or a warm climate? Well, it says ripe blackcurrant fruit, and it also talks about very chewy tannins, full body, and warmth on the back palate, which tells us that it has alcohol. So chances are it probably comes from a warm climate. Now, does it come from the Old World or New World? Let's take a look. I see here that it says mineral notes. So is that Old World or New World? Old World. Chances are when you see a note like that that says mineral notes, it's Old World. Now, how about American oak or French oak? Let's take a look. Well, it says vanilla, which we know is an oak note, hint of coconut. You know that is an American oak characteristic. So it could be both. I don't want you to be able to try to say this is definitely American or French. I just want you to start thinking about this. Now let's look at the quality level. Is it a low quality, medium quality, or high quality? Well, here it says it has a long finish with a high level of complexity and very well balanced. Those are quality parameters. Okay, so we probably think this is a high quality wine from the Old World, from a warm climate. So what is it not? Well, it couldn't be Bordeaux. It's not warm enough there. It could be from Italy or the Rhone, but they don't use American oak there. So where in the Old World do you get high quality, rich, dark wines with American oak? If you guessed Spain, you're right. It's the Torres La Plana Cabernet Sauvignon. Now let's look at wine number 2. Pale ruby color with intense aromas of very ripe, upfront strawberry and cherry fruit, almost like strawberry jam, with hints of vanilla and spice. On the palate, it is light-bodied, fairly high acid, with a moderate finish and good balance. So, is this a thin-skinned grape or a thick-skinned grape? Well, it says pale ruby color, so chances are it's a thin-skinned grape. So is this an aromatic grape variety, do you think, or a neutral grape variety? Well, it says intense aromas, so chances are it's an aromatic grape. Is it a warm climate, or is it a cool climate? Here we see high acidity, light body. Those are kind of indications of a cool climate. But it also says strawberry jam. So you do get some ripe flavors in there, but it does point to a cooler climate. Now, what about Old World versus New World? Well, I don't see any notes of minerality here. And I see upfront strawberry fruit. So chances are it probably comes from a New World country. Now, is this matured in French oak or American oak or any oak at all? Well, it says hints of vanilla and spice. Those are indications that it's probably matured in oak. Now let's look at the quality level. Is it low, medium, or high? Well, it says it has a moderate finish and a good balance, so likely in the medium area. So now we have a good quality Pinot Noir from the New World. So where could it be from? If you said it was from California, you would be right. What gave it away? Well, chances are it's that strawberry jam note, but that's subtle. I would have given you points for Oregon. Now, how many did you get right? Let me put it this way. How many did you get right today versus what you think you might have gotten correct before you started this course? I'll let you in on a little secret. You are now able to do more than most wine drinkers on the planet, so you should be proud of yourself. Actually, that test I just did with you, I do with my husband all the time. I'll come home with a bottle of wine, hide it in the kitchen, cover the bottle with aluminum foil, and test my husband. At first he would say, "Oh, honey, I just want to drink. I don't want to do this." But after doing it a few times, whenever we have guests over and I try this little test out, he's the first to say, "It's a thick-skinned grape variety. I think it's Cab because it's got that green bell pepper notes." It's really quite fun, and after a while, it can be quite humbling as well. Remember, it's not about getting it right. It's about having fun with your senses. Next up, we will cover the wines from the rest of North America, including Canada. You'll need the following wines: a New York wine, preferably Finger Lakes or Long Island Chardonnay, Virginia wine, red Virginia wine. Here we have the Norton. Texas wine. Here, a fruit wine. Here we have a rhubarb wine. A wine from Idaho, and a wine from Canada, preferably an Inniskillin ice wine. Now, some of these may be hard to find at your local wine store, so you may have to order them online. However, if you can't find them, don't worry. Just look within your own state, because every state has a wine region. Information on these wines may be hard to find as well, even for me, and I know where to look. The beauty of this, though, is that many of these are new wine regions. I mean, who knows? You may have some great wines in your own backyard. For example, remember how I said there is no limestone soil in California, and we found this soil all throughout France and adding finesse to these wines? Well, guess what? We find it in Texas. I wonder what that does to the wines. Finding a wine in your region can be a source of tremendous pride. It also gives you a fun outing for when friends come over to visit. But until next time, great job, connoisseurs, and cheers.